Hi, this is Ben Hart for BitcoinInstitute.net. We're going to look at the question today of, is America on the way to becoming like Venezuela? In 1950, Venezuela was the fourth richest country in the world by per capita GDP. But they threw it all away in 1998 by going socialist, because the people of Venezuela were not paying attention. Today, Venezuela is among the poorest countries in Latin America. People are having trouble getting food, toilet paper, and the basic necessities of life. Could the same happen here in America? Well, I believe it already is happening, and pretty quickly. But before we get into all of this, let me pause to encourage you to hit the like button, the notification button, and also to subscribe to my channel if you find the information here useful. This will really help boost the channel with YouTube's algorithms. You can also follow me on Twitter and check out my book on Bitcoin, which is your off-ramp from the corrupt political system and protection from economic collapse. And you can find the link to all of this below. Now let's look at some of the factors that made America so prosperous in the first place, including the definition of money historically in America, and how what money is has become badly corrupted since 1933. I believe a key factor in America's success was a commitment to honest money. For example, do you know that the United States Constitution says that the US dollar is supposed to be 100% backed by gold and silver? Here's what the US Constitution says about money. In Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, quote, "No state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts." Based on this clause, the United States Supreme Court ruled in 1844 that creditors are entitled to demand payment in gold or silver. The name of this Supreme Court case was Gwynn versus Breedlove, and this clause in the U.S. Constitution has never been amended or changed. It's still the supreme law of the land. The government's fiat money printing system that we've had since 1971 is illegal and unconstitutional. This standard for money, the gold and silver standard, is often called the bimetal standard, because the standard for money established in the U.S. Constitution was gold and silver. And 4 years after the U.S. Constitution was ratified, Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1792, just to emphasize all of this, which decreed that the death penalty would be imposed on anyone caught debasing the money. This is how serious America's founders were about protecting the honesty of the money. Because without honest money, you can't have a free and prosperous society. Also, under this law, the Coinage Act of 1792, free minting privileges were granted to all Americans. They could take their gold or their silver to the mint and have it minted into coins, thus certifying that the gold and silver were genuine and in the correct amount for the coin. And this practice remained in effect until 1873. Then in 1900, Congress enacted the Gold Standard Act, which formally fixed the value of $1 at 25.8 grains of 90% pure gold, equivalent to $20.67 per troy ounce of gold, which was near its historic value. This law did not really change much. It just underscored everyone's understanding of what money is supposed to be. Until 1933, U.S. paper money were certificates that were convertible to gold. You could actually show up at a bank window to get gold in return for your paper money. Your paper money was issued actually by the bank as a claim against that bank's gold reserves. And the 19th century in America was a period of amazing prosperity and expansion for the United States. The United States was so prosperous that the great writer and statesman from France, named Alexis de Tocqueville, traveled to America to find out the secret of America's stunning success. Tocqueville then wrote his classic 2-volume work, Democracy in America. One of the big keys to America's success, Tocqueville observed, was America's very decentralized political, social, and economic structure. And the United States of America was rapidly becoming a formidable commercial empire, a serious rival to the British Empire. Millions of immigrants traveled to America to carve out a new life for themselves in this land of opportunity. So it's absurd to suggest that a stable standard for money, the gold and silver standard, in any way hindered America's stunning prosperity. Yet that's exactly what modern economics argues. Modern economics tells us that inflation is good for us. On April 5th, 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order number 6102, requiring that every American bring all their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to a Federal Reserve Bank branch and exchange them for paper dollar money that were not gold certificates. Citizens would receive $20.67 for each troy ounce of gold they turned in. People who failed to turn in their gold were prosecuted and imprisoned. And FDR did this just 1 month after he was inaugurated president for his first term. So this was a plan that was in the works. Then on January 30th, 1934, President FDR signed into law the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, which pegged the price of gold at $35 per ounce instead of the $20.67 per ounce that it had been, and had been historically throughout America's history. Thus, overnight, FDR, by devaluing the dollar by 41%, was effectively confiscating 41% of people's money. Now, I have argued, as have other economists, that this action by President Roosevelt turned what people had assumed was a relatively ordinary recession that might last a couple of years into the Great Depression that lasted a decade. Now, why did FDR do this? Why did he confiscate, overnight, 41% of people's money? Well, the simple answer is he wanted more money for his New Deal programs. So this confiscation of people's gold and paper dollars that were supposed to be certificates convertible to gold was a giant money grab by FDR. But the good news is that at least gold stayed at $35 per ounce until Richard Nixon took the United States off the gold standard completely on August 15, 1971. On that date, U.S. money became 100% government fiat money, meaning that government could be unrestrained in its printing of new dollars. Government could print as much money as it wanted. The dollar would not be tethered to any hard asset. Now, why did Nixon do this? Well, he did it for the same reason FDR did it. He wanted more money, both to fund the Vietnam War and to expand Lyndon Johnson's Great Society welfare programs. Raising taxes to fund war and government growth is never popular. It's much easier just to print more money. And this produces an extra tax called inflation. But it's an extra tax that people don't really notice at first, especially if the economy appears to be doing well. Money printing is always politically popular at first because it provides a temporary sugar high for the economy. And this indeed turned out to be the case for Nixon. 1 year after he did this, 1 year after he took the U.S. off the gold standard completely, he won 49 states in the 1972 election, with more than 60% of the popular vote. Of course, Nixon was forced to resign from office 2 years later over the Watergate scandal. Just 1 year after going off the gold standard, inflation had started to edged up to 3.2%, according to the Consumer Price Index, which is the government's official measure of inflation. And that's compared to 2.5% average inflation rate for the 1960s. But 2 years later, by 1974, the inflation rate had skyrocketed to 11.4%. And by 1980, the average annual inflation rate for that year was 13.5% as a direct result of fiat money printing. Plus, by 1980, the U.S. had fallen into a severe recession. So that's what happens in a fiat money printing system. Money printing can provide a short-term boost to the economy, a kind of cocaine high. But this is followed by a crash. Now, since the Carter years, the Federal Reserve has learned how to keep inflation at a more tolerable 2 to 4% level for the most part. But it's also important to note that the government keeps changing the way it measures inflation. The inflation rate is reported each month by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in the form of what is called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. If the CPI inflation rate were still calculated the same way it was in 1980, the inflation rate would be about 5% higher than the official CPI inflation number reported each month by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So right now, the official inflation rate, according to the government's official CPI report, is running right around 8 or 9%. But the true inflation rate is more like 13 or 14% if the government was still measuring the inflation rate the same way it was in 1980. So think of this as an extra 13 or 14 or 15% extra tax on your money every year. Now, the government has an incentive to understate true inflation because, number one, the government does not want to adjust Social Security payments to account for the true increases in cost of living. Number two, the government doesn't want to pay high interest rates on the $32 trillion national debt, which is rapidly heading to $100 trillion. If the government were to pay market-based interest rates, the entire federal budget would be interest payments on the national debt. There would be no money left in the federal budget for defense, for roads, for courts, for Social Security, for social safety net programs, for police, or for any of the things that we want government to do. In a fiat money printing system, interest rates are set by the government, not by the free market. But also, the $32 trillion national debt we now have is not money that will ever be paid back. The way the government pays for this debt is to set interest rates very low, around 2% or so, and to keep printing money, to keep printing trillions and trillions of new dollars every year. And this debases the value of the dollars that you have earned. Now remember what the penalty was for debasing the money that the founding fathers of this country put in place in the 1792 Coinage Act. The penalty for debasing the money was the death penalty. But that's what our government is doing right now. It's just printing trillions and trillions of dollars and dumping them onto the economy, which then devalues the dollars that you have earned, which really is a form of theft. It's counterfeiting. So in addition to the taxes that you pay, the government is stealing an extra 15% or so of the money that you have earned per year with its money printing press, with its counterfeiting operation, which is really a criminal enterprise. But here's something else to keep in mind. Technological progress should be putting relentless downward pressure on prices if we had an honest money system. Because technology makes us so much more productive and makes manufacturing much more efficient, prices should be actually going down by about 2 to 3% per year. So this is part of the theft. This is the additional 2 or 3% theft that is going on with the fiat money printing press. So, for example, farming is largely automated today. We have giant farms owned by major corporations, which have giant machines and vastly improved fertilizer and irrigation systems. Farming today is done largely with AI-guided robots. So your groceries should be getting cheaper and cheaper every year because of this technological progress. And the same is true for everything we buy, whether it's furniture, the house that you're building. All this is done more efficiently today than it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago. So we really need to add another 2 or 3% to the inflation rate to account for the fact that the cost of living should be declining by 2 or 3% per year due to technological progress. So the true yearly debasement of the currency is not the 8 or 9% that the government reports today. And it's not 12 or 14% that it would be if the government were still using the same standard to measure inflation that it was in 1980. You also have to add another 2 or 3% to this because we should be getting another 2 or 3% cost of living decline due to technological progress, due to more efficient manufacturing, due to AI-powered robotics, and due to massively increased productivity enabled by advances in technology. So really, the Fed's money printing press is adding probably another 15 or 17% tax on your money. And for some perspective on this, you just have to look at the price of gold. In 1971, when Nixon took us off the gold standard completely, 1 ounce of gold cost $35. Today, the cost of 1 ounce of gold is more than $1,700. So the dollar has lost 98% of its value since 1971, when measured against gold. In other words, instead of paying $40,000 for a pretty decent car today, you should be paying less than $1,000 for the same car. Let that sink in. Also, understand what money represents. Money is a storage system for your labor, for your productivity, and the value that you provided with your labor, your inventions, or the services that you provided. Money allows you to store this value and use it later. Inflation is a thief. Inflation steals the work and value that you have provided and that you have saved for later use. So inflation has stolen 98% of what someone earned in 1971. Now, Bitcoin was designed to solve the problem of dishonest money, the problem of the government's fiat money printing press, the problem of the government's counterfeiting operation. Bitcoin was designed to be honest electronic money. There's a finite supply. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. In a sound money system, the rules should be fixed. Bitcoin found a way to remove humans from the money system. Bitcoin is governed by math and cryptographic computer algorithms, not by people. People are prone to corruption. The fundamental rules of the Bitcoin money system can never change. What Bitcoin does is separate money from government. Bitcoin separates money from state. And Bitcoin was also designed to address some of the shortcomings of gold. Bitcoin has many of the properties of gold. In fact, Bitcoin is often called digital gold. Similar to gold, Bitcoin is scarce. That is, there's a limited supply. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. Gold is also scarce. Warren Buffett says that all the gold in the world would fit into a 67 square foot cube. Scarcity plus demand makes gold valuable. This is why gold served as the base layer for U.S. money until April 5th, 1933, and to some extent until 1971, when Nixon took us off the gold standard completely. But unlike gold, Bitcoin is unconfiscatable, so long as you don't let anyone get your private key code. Bitcoin is unconfiscatable because it's not located anywhere. Bitcoin exists in the form of an uneditable synchronized blockchain ledger distributed every 10 minutes to a worldwide network of more than 1 million miners and nodes. Bitcoin is not headquartered anywhere. It's not hosted on any servers. And it's protected by military-grade SHA-256 cryptography, which was developed by the National Security Agency. SHA-256 is considered unhackable code. And indeed, Bitcoin's underlying technology has never been hacked in its 13 years of existence. People have had their private keys stolen, so lost their Bitcoin that way. Either they weren't careful with their private keys, or they left their private keys on a centrally administered exchange, which you should never do. Not your keys, not your coins, is the rule. So if you protect your private keys, your Bitcoin is unconfiscatable, which is unlike gold. Gold is confiscatable, as President FDR demonstrated. He confiscated the gold of every U.S. citizen in 1933. Also unlike gold, Bitcoin is usable money. With Bitcoin, you can transact with anyone in the world with a few keystrokes on your phone. And unlike gold, you can carry your Bitcoin with you. So if there's a socialist or communist takeover here in the United States, you can carry your wealth with you on your phone, or by writing your private key code on a piece of paper, or by carrying your code in your head if you can remember a 12-word private key recovery phrase. We have not seen the price of gold go up much in the past decade, despite all the manic money printing by the Fed. And I believe one reason the price of gold has been pretty static over the last decade is many are seeing Bitcoin as the better alternative. It won't be long before every store is set up to accept Bitcoin as payment at their cash register, probably in the form of the Lightning Network. The big advantage to the merchant will be no more credit card transaction fees if you use the Lightning Network, which is the layer 2 that's being built on top of Bitcoin. With Lightning, transactions are free or almost free. And more on Lightning in another video. The focus of this video is the big problem that Bitcoin solves. And that's the problem of the government's dishonest fiat money printing press, which will continue to just print more and more money at faster and faster speeds. Over the past 9 months or so, we have seen a pause in the money printing as the Fed tries to get inflation under control. So the Fed has increased interest rates some. But this is unlikely to continue for long, for the simple reason that we now have a $32 trillion national debt. The only way the government can deal with this debt is to bring interest rates back down, probably sometime next year in 2023, and turn on the money printing press again. Because the U.S. government can't afford to pay 4 or 5% interest on the national debt. So the Fed really has no choice but to start up the money printing press again, probably in 2023. Now today, not much physical currency is actually printed. The amount of physical currency in circulation is about $2.1 trillion in a $21 trillion economy. So just 10% of U.S. money in circulation is physical currency. 90% of the money the Fed creates is digital. Most money today is just digital notations on a ledger that the Fed then lends to banks. During the pandemic, the Fed charged banks near 0% for the money. This is how the Fed puts new money into the economy. It's basically free money. Banks then lend out this money with about a 3% markup over whatever the Fed charged the banks for the money. Right now, the Fed funds rate is about 2.5% or 2.75%, up from 0% during the pandemic. And the Fed funds rate might go up to 4%, which is the interest rate that the Fed charges the banks for money. And then the banks might lend the money out for 7% or so, which is really not a high interest rate by historical standards. But we've gotten used to, essentially, free money. Now, when Paul Volcker arrived as Fed chairman in 1979, inflation was running right around 13 to 15%, thanks to Nixon taking us off the gold standard in 1971. So Volcker was able to tame inflation by jacking up interest rates to 18 and even 20%, which stopped the Fed's money printing press. Volcker was an honest money guy. And actually, this turned out to be very good long-term for the economy. The U.S. enjoyed a 25-year economic boom. I believe because of the tough medicine that Volcker applied to inflation from 1979 through 1981. The 18 and 20% interest rates that Volcker imposed did cause a severe 2-year recession, but he crushed inflation. And this laid the foundation for a tremendous economic boom. Sound money produces sustainable prosperity in the long run. But the national debt when Volcker arrived as Fed chairman in 1979 was less than $1 trillion. Today, the national debt is $32 trillion. If the Fed were to jack up interest rates to 18 or 20%, the way Volcker did in 1979 and 1980, the entire U.S. budget and more would be interest payments on the national debt. Right now, tax collections only cover about half of federal spending. The other half of federal spending is covered by money printing. And federal spending continues to rise. Federal spending never goes down, never levels off. Federal spending only goes up. And by the way, it's really a misnomer to call the $32 trillion national debt a debt, because it's just money the government owes itself. It's just money that the government prints up out of thin air. What happens is the U.S. Treasury prints up treasury bonds, which are IOUs. They're debt instruments. They're a piece of paper that says that the government owes this money. The Fed then prints up money to buy these treasury bonds, which the Fed then calls assets. Or other countries or people buy these treasury bonds, and the Fed then prints up money to pay the interest on these bonds. So the money the government is borrowing is money that the government is borrowing from itself. The IOUs essentially go in one drawer, and the newly printed money goes into another drawer to pay the IOUs, and then they just switch drawers. The IOUs go in that drawer, and the newly printed money goes in that drawer, and that's how the system works. So it's not borrowing, it's just money printing. And the Fed just uses a bunch of clever accounting tricks to hide the fact that all it's really doing is printing money, or creating digital money. And the way it's paid for is with that extra tax called inflation, which the government tells us is in the 8 to 9% range, but which is actually more like 15% this year. So that's an extra 15% tax on you, in addition to the taxes that you already pay, and a tax that was never passed by Congress. And it's also a tax that compounds against you every year. So under this system, when you think about it, there's really no need to have taxes. The Fed can just print up the money. And there's no point for you to work anymore, because the Fed can just print up money and hand it to you. Voila, free money. It's called the new economics. But it's actually the road to ruin. The only question is when. How long can this Ponzi scheme last before it collapses? How long can this criminal enterprise, this counterfeiting operation, continue? So far it appears a 100% certainty, at least in my mind, that this money tightening and slight increase in interest rates by the Fed is a very temporary phenomenon. The Fed cannot keep this up for long for the simple reason that the U.S. government cannot afford to pay high interest rates on the $32 trillion national debt that's rapidly heading to $100 trillion. We'll hit $100 trillion national debt in the next 3 to 5 years. The national debt was $19 trillion in 2019. Now 3 years later, it's $32 trillion. So the national debt has nearly doubled in just 3 years. This is why socialists love fiat money printing. It's the fastest way to grow government without going to the trouble of enacting tax increases through legislation. The tax increases just happen automatically, every day, all day, in the form of money printing. That is, in the form of causing the money that you have earned to become worth less and less, to become worthless. The fiat money printing system is really a giant criminal enterprise run by the government. America's founders would think, if they saw this, that it should be the death penalty for today's politicians and central bankers. Now, the U.S. government never intends to pay off this $32 trillion national debt, soon to be $100 trillion. The way government covers this debt is by printing just enough money to cover the interest payments. This is called monetizing the debt, but it's actually just counterfeiting. If you or I counterfeit money, we go to prison for decades. Counterfeiting is considered a crime against the state, a crime against civilization. And that concept, that principle, is really a holdover from the earlier laws calling for the death penalty for counterfeiters. Counterfeiting in U.S. law has always been treated as akin to treason. But the U.S. government engages in counterfeiting, money printing all day, every day. Now remember, U.S. money is still supposed to be 100% backed by gold and silver, according to the U.S. Constitution. This clause of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, has never been repealed or amended. It's still supposed to be the law of the land. But the Constitution is simply ignored by our politicians and central bankers. And printing money is addictive. It's like a drug. Imagine if you had a money printing press at home. And let's say you could just print money all day without consequence, even though you know that by printing money in your basement, you would be stealing money from everyone else, because you would be diluting the value of people's money by printing more of it. Do you think you would be restrained by your conscience? Well, you might be for a little while. At first you might say something like, well, I'll just print a little money. No one's really going to notice. But you'll always be tempted to print more and more, especially if you know there's no consequence, and especially if you know you'll actually be rewarded for printing money, not just in the form of getting money, but rewarded in other ways. And that's what politicians do. They can't resist the money printing press either, because printing more and more money usually provides a temporary boost to the economy, a cocaine high. Politicians are incentivized by one thing: to win re-election. Elections for Congress take place every 2 years, and for president every 4 years. If they can goose the economy with a bit of extra money printing, this, of course, is exactly what they're going to do. That's why Nixon took us off the gold standard completely in 1971, because he knew it would help him politically. And indeed it did. He won 49 states in 1972, with more than 60% of the popular vote. Now you might say, well, maybe it's good that we went off the gold standard. After all, we seem to be living better and seem to be more prosperous overall than we were in 1971. And that is true. We are living better. But that's not because of money printing. It's despite all the money printing. Prosperity is not created with money printing. It's created by human ingenuity in our free market capitalist system. Because of technological progress, we're able to be far more productive. And that productivity, that technological progress that makes more productivity possible, is produced by human ingenuity, not by money printing. We had tremendous economic growth and technological progress before we went off the gold standard. We saw the emergence of the automobile industry, the airline industry, the telephone, computers. We landed people on the moon in the 1960s. We haven't landed anybody on the moon since the 1960s. And that was half a century ago. So no, money printing does not produce technological progress or sustainable prosperity. Money printing is more like a cocaine addiction. People who are addicted to cocaine often can function pretty well for a period of time. I've known some high-functioning cocaine addicts. But the crash does come at some point, and the ultimate cost of the addiction is enormous, can be catastrophic. For the cocaine addict, the ultimate price can be death through overdose. For the money printing addiction by government, the ultimate price is economic collapse, usually followed by a dictatorship of some kind. In the case of the Weimar Republic, the result was Hitler. Now here's something else to think about. Before we went off the gold standard in 1971, people expected to retire by age 65 and live off the approximately 4% interest rate generated by their savings. Most people invested in U.S. Treasury bonds, or high-grade corporate bonds, or municipal bonds. There wasn't much talk about the stock market in the 1960s. Stocks were considered risky investments. People were happy with the 3% or 4% income they could generate with their life savings, so could retire comfortably at age 65. Today, retirement is out of reach for 99% of Americans because they have no idea what the cost of tomorrow will be. So people really have no choice but to work until they die. There'll be no retirement. This is why inflation and money debasement creates a slave economy. So money printing creates a kind of slave society where there is no retirement. To stay ahead of true inflation, and not just the fraudulent CPI number, people also feel that they need to get 20% annual returns on their investments. So they invest in risky growth stocks. This produces boom and bust economic cycles. So we had the tech bubble and crash in 2000-2001, where the NASDAQ crashed 85%. Then we had the financial collapse of 2008. In fact, it was out of the 2008 financial collapse that Bitcoin was born. Bitcoin was the answer that a group of brilliant computer engineers came up with to address what has become an obviously deeply corrupt fiat money printing system. And now we have another recession, and the highest inflation rates we've seen in 43 years. This was the problem that Bitcoin was designed to address. It's also worth noting that this extra tax called inflation hits low income and people on fixed incomes hardest. And the reason is because these people are living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have extra cash to invest in assets that tend to appreciate when measured against the dollar. They don't have money to buy real estate or stock market index funds or rare art. They're spending every dollar they have to make ends meet. So inflation is actually a giant wealth transfer system from the poor to the rich. For me, Bitcoin is like insurance. It's insurance against economic and political system collapse. I believe our economic system right now is a house of cards that's highly likely to implode into a black hole of debt. When this happens, there will be chaos and riots on the streets. And there could well be a socialist or communist takeover, because bad things happen when there's an economic collapse. We saw what happened in Germany with the collapse of the Weimar Republic, when rampant money printing produced inflation rates of 10,000% and more. The result of that was Hitler. I believe we are way beyond the event horizon in terms of fiat money printing, economic corruption, and political corruption. That's why I own Bitcoin. If we have a socialist or communist takeover here in America, which I think is pretty likely, I'll be able to carry my Bitcoin to wherever civilization might still exist in some form. I can't carry my houses or my rental properties with me, If the socialists take over, they can grab my stock holdings and they can seize my bank accounts. If I had gold bars, these would be difficult to move. This is why I think having some Bitcoin is a good idea, in case all hell breaks loose here. Again, if you find this video and the information here useful, I hope you'll hit the like button, the notification button, and subscribe to my channel. This will help boost the channel with YouTube's algorithms. You can also follow me on Twitter and check out my book on Bitcoin. And you can find the links to all of this below. Have an awesome day, and I hope to see you back here soon for the next video.